countrymen and countrywomen, today I decided to make my independence speech through the television and the radio because it's a bit longish, and when you try to make a long speech in an open air forum, people get tired because it is hot and so on. Therefore, I have printed that speech in a booklet here, which will be distributed to everybody, those interested. But I have got this one here, which I will read. Then tomorrow, I will make a summary in Kitgum. Countrymen and countrywomen, first of all, I congratulate all of us for reaching this 61st year of Uganda's independence. Mukulukeyo mwenna. Now, the main theme of my speech is from the Common Prayer Book of the Church of Uganda, which is on page 42 of that prayer book. And the prayer book itself was written in 1662. And it says in Uganda, balekanga bye basande kukola, ne bakola bye batasande kukola, n'amazima tegali mu bo. They left undone what they ought to have done, and they did that they ought not to have done, and there's no truth in them. This is on page 42 in the Book of Common Prayer of 1662 of the Church of Uganda. This is one of the many scripture pieces that stuck in my head. I remember the Reverend Kariahwari always reciting this portion. How well it describes many situations in the world and especially in Africa today. However, in the last 60 years or so, but especially after 1965, what became the NRM has been defogging, to remove the fog, okujja k'olufu, has been defogging this confusion and disorientation. Because that's what the prayer book talks about. It is fogging, creating fog. Balekanga bye basande kukola, ne bakola bye batasande kukola. They live undone what they ought to do, they do what they ought not to do, because they don't see properly. So that's why we talk of defogging, remove the fog. Okujako orufu, okuyaho orho. Therefore today, on the 61st anniversary of Uganda's independence, it is crucial to restate clearly again the essential ingredients of success for Uganda and maybe the wider Africa. So, if we are not going to be like those people, abalekanga bye basande kukola, ne bakola bye batasande kukola, what should we emphasize on? if we are not going to be like those who left, who did what they ought not have done, and they did that they ought not have done, and there's no truth in them. What do we do? Here below are the crucial ingredients. First and foremost, we reject the pseudo-ideology of emphasizing the politics of identity, and we emphasize the politics of interests. While we recognize and respect the respective identities of our people, according to religion, according to tribes, according to gender, we insist that in order to ensure the economic and social prosperity of our people, we must not forget their needs. And what are these needs? Food, jobs, market for their products, sources of raw materials for their industries, shelter, etc. Since 1965, the NRM has been insisting that although our people belong to different tribes and to different religions, etc., they first of all have similar needs: hunger, poverty, shelter, poor infrastructure, inadequate clothing, health, etc. And secondly, they need the supra-tribal Ugandan market and the Pan-African market for their products to ensure their prosperity. This is where we separate with the opportunists who keep talking about identity, Amawanga, tribes, religion, and so on. But me, as a cattle keeper, yes, I have got other cattle keepers who stay near me. But the people who buy my milk, who buy my beef, who buy my bananas, are not my neighbors. This is because my neighbors have what I have. They have milk, I have milk. They have beef, I have beef. They have bananas, I have bananas. So how do they help me? The people who help me are the other Ugandans who are doing different things. They are the ones who buy what I have, and I also buy what they have, which I don't have. So that's why we reject the emphasis on identity politics. Yes, we are Banyankore, yes, we are Baganda, but so what? What are our interests? What are the interests of the Muganda? What are the interests of the Muchori? With tribal solidarity solve his problems? The Achoris are all producing sim-sim. This one is sim-sim, the other one is sim-sim. They can't buy from one another because they have similar products. So, who are the ones who buy the sim-sim of the Achoris? We, the people of Kampala. I don't grow sim-sim, so I buy it. Therefore, the prosperity of our Acholi people is based on my pocket. I am the one who buys the sim-sim. So if an Acholi builds a good house, it is because of my pocket. Me who is not an Acholi. So therefore, we reject, we call this pseudo-ideology. And we are saying that prosperity, okubeera obulungi kw'abantu baffe, will come from our people selling their products to the Ugandan market and to the African market. And that's why we say patriotism, love Uganda. Pan-Africanism, love Africa. And we reject the sectarianism where they talk of Moyo Gwanga meaning the spirit of the tribe. The spirit of the tribe. For us we say Moyo Gwa Uganda, Moyo Gwa Africa. Hence, the two principles of the NRM, of patriotism and Pan-Africanism. Otherwise, we have told you repeatedly, we shall build a Latin America in Africa instead of building a United States of Africa in Africa. You all watch on TV channels the misery of the Latin American populations, walking on foot, fleeing man-made poverty in their respective countries, their tremendous natural resources, the rivers, the forests, the minerals, the good climate for some of them, the ancient heritage of indigenous Indian peoples, etc., and culture notwithstanding, to the man-made affluence in the United States, simply because the latter, the USA, emphasized integration, while the former Latin America emphasized fragmentation. I must apologize that I didn't alert my team to put these pictures here, but they're in the booklet, they're here. Now you can see Latin America is very rich in terms of natural resources, much richer than the United States. But they are organized badly. They are fragmented. Brazil is alone, Ecuador alone, Argentina. And that type of organization does not encourage business. So therefore, what we are telling you is that, number one, reject the ideology of identity politics. Because that identity politics of tribe, of religion, of gender chauvinism does not address the issue of prosperity. They don't answer our question of how can we be prosperous. We can be prosperous by producing and selling what we produce, which means we need a market, and not a small market, we need a big one. This is the difference between the United States, between China, between India, and Latin America, and between them and Africa now, because even now, you see, we have got our Basoga people have got a bicado surplus, a bicado sugar. We have been having a surplus of sugar. People in Tanzania, they need sugar, but they buy from, I don't know, Brazil. Then we must bargain, haggle. Duma, maize, a lot of maize. Problem with maize, milk, cement, so many products which can't easily enter the African market because of the sengenges, the colonial sengenges, which we have not removed. Sengenge means barbed wire, the put on the border. So we are saying, please stop tribal, religious talk. Talk about Uganda, talk about Africa. Why? Because you need those for your prosperity. Emphasizing the 4 principles of the NRM, therefore, of patriotism, Pan-Africanism, socio-economic transformation and democracy, creates adequate space for guaranteeing the prosperity of the wealth creators. And who are the wealth creators? The farmers like me. I am a wealth creator, I am not a wealth consumer. The artisans, the manufacturers, and the service providers. All those, by giving them a big enough market, and also by expanding sectarianism, which act helps us in building strong national institutions, such as the army, that guarantees our security. The ideology of patriotism and Pan-Africanism also promotes harmony among the people. That is why we no longer have a refugee problem, while by 1986, Uganda was among the 4 top countries in the world in refugees generation, in producing refugees. 500,000 Ugandans, mainly peasants, and a large group of exiles, mainly the elite. The former were in Congo and South Sudan, and the latter, the Banasomako, the elite, were in the USA, UK, Sweden, Kenya, South Africa, etc. There were so many Ugandan doctors that had fled and working abroad. All the refugees came back, and the Ugandans who are still outside are there voluntarily. The ideology of emphasizing interests rather than opportunistically manipulating identity has therefore created more opportunity for prosperity, created stability, and created capable institutions of state. It is one of the necessary ingredients for success. So when you are dealing with the other issue of balekanga bibasande kukola, they left and done what they ought to have done, and they did what they ought not to have done. We are now telling you that this is the first thing you should do. If you forget patriotism, you forget Pan-Africanism, and you go into sectarianism, you are lost. Balekanga bibasande kukola, nibokola bibatasande kukola, namazima tegali mu bo. The second ingredient for success is the philosophy and strategy of emancipating the private sector and encouraging it to be the best creator of wealth in the economy. In the book of John chapter 10, verse 11 to 13, Jesus talked of the hired hand, omukozi ow'empeera. I don't know how they say it in Uganda. Bakyogera bati mu Uganda. Bano benna wano Oluganda lwabwe tebategerekeka bali awo. Abamu Bakongo, abamu simanyi ba. So the hired hand. But in Yankole we say omukozi w'empeera, omupakasi. So it says, in quotes, I am the good shepherd. the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Even the Banyankole say, obwenje kuburra mukama wente omufuma aragurra busha. When the owner of the cow does not know how to manage it, the veterinary person cannot save the cow. The Nachivu announcements of 1970 and the actions of Idi Amin of expelling the Indian investors were strategic mistakes because they undermined the work of those wealth creators by confiscating, either partially or wholly, the wealth of those actors. There are a few actors in the world that can work for altruistic reasons, and those are the likes of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Mwalimu Nyerere, or we, the NRA fighters. For us, we were working not for ourselves. The NRA fighters, Mwalimu Nyerere, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, were not working for pay. We were working for Moyogwa Uganda, Moyogwa Africa, for Pan-Africanism, patriotism. But we are, however, for the majority of cases, they are motivated to work for personal gain. It was therefore philosophically wrong to think that you can sustainably and efficiently build an economy based on parastatals. It is a strategy that had implied risks. This is why the NRM, while not ruling out the role of the parastatals here and there, encouraged the private sector. The private sector players, foreign and local, are very reliable actors because they act in their own interest, but in the process, for the majority of cases, also act in the interest of the country. There is, however, a great need for the government to play a regulatory role to ensure that the private sector does not take shortcuts and endanger the health of the consumers. It is therefore the patriotic duty of all Ugandans to encourage the private sector, whether they are local or foreign. They all build our GDP, which means the value of the wealth on the territory of Uganda, whether by our citizens or others. In the process, it also helps us to expand our GNP, gross national product, which is the value of the wealth of our citizens, whether located here or abroad. The GDP of the USA is US dollars 26.24 trillion. Its GNP is US dollars 24 trillion. So you can hear a country like the United States, the bigger portion of the economy is by citizens and foreigners. The foreigners add on in the US another $2 trillion. The indigenous own the rest. That of China, the GDP of China is USD 19 trillion, 19.37 trillion, and the GNP 14 trillion. So you find that in China, the foreigners have done more than the locals in building the economy. An extra like 5 trillion is brought in by the foreigners. So therefore, delaying investors, whether local or foreign, is enemy action, and we shall take it as such. So therefore, the second important thing, once you are clear about no sectarianism, no politics of identity, the next most important point is to encourage the private sector, not to disturb them, not to waste their time, not to ask bribes from them, not to delay them, because they will help us to build our country. The third most crucial ingredient is economic infrastructure, especially electricity, the railway, the roads, the ICT backbone, airports, ports, piped water, irrigation canals, etc. These are crucial so as to create connectivity by linking the producers with the consumers, i.e. in the form of roads, the railway, airports, the ICT backbone, the ports, or lowering costs of doing business in the economy and also stabilizing agriculture in the case of irrigation. This will make our products plentiful and competitive. So, number one, don't believe in sectarianism, believe in patriotism, Pan-Africanism. Number two, encourage the private sector. Number three, work on the infrastructure, economic infrastructure. The fourth ingredient is social infrastructure in the form of schools, health centers, and research institutions that will help us or are helping us to deal with the health, knowledge, and skills of the human resource. Because for the human resource to produce, they need knowledge, education, they need skills, education with skills, and they need health. They need to be healthy. So that's why we need social infrastructure in the form of schools, in the form of health centers. The other roads and so on are economic infrastructure. This is social infrastructure. A modern society and economy need healthy people that are knowledgeable and skilled. The fifth ingredient is working on regional economic and political integration so as to guarantee a market for our products and also ensuring our strategic security against any and all threats to our future. Now, I've already told you about the market. Uganda market alone is not enough. That's why it is not able to absorb all our milk. Milk we produce now 5.4 billion liters. You Ugandans are drinking only 800 million. So there is a surplus now of 4 billion liters. If we do not have the markets of other countries, of East Africa, of Congo, of South Sudan, the milk industry will collapse. The maize, 5 million tons. Ugandans consume only 1 million tons. Surplus 4 million tons. Avocado, Nasukari, I think we are now at 700,000 tons of sugar. But the consumption within Uganda is about 320,000 or something like that. So we've got a surplus of almost 400,000. And so on. So, without a regional market, what is the future? That's why when I see the politics in the TV, in the radios, in the newspapers, talking about what? nobody talking about integration. Then you know that abantu baffe balekanga byebasande kukola ne bakola byebatasande kukola n'amazima tigali mu bo. They have left and done what they ought to. You should be talking about integration. Link up with your friends in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Congo, in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, in other West Africa, to talk about integration. Because in order for us to be prosperous, we need a big market for the wealth creators. So this is point number 5. Number 6, the 6th ingredient are some international contacts with those that are willing to trade with us on an equitable basis and are reliable partners when it comes to the exchange of goods and services. Some of these international contacts, apart from trading with us, can also generate investors to come to our country. They can be sources of tourists and can bring technology to our country. So we also need international contacts with the people who respect, who respect us, who don't interfere in our internal politics. The 7th ingredient is to eliminate corruption. Corruption takes the form of stealing government money meant for pro-people efforts like economic activities, infrastructure, service delivery, etc. It means taking bribes from the public who are looking for services, like somebody is looking for a job, you take a bribe from him. Somebody wants medical attention, you must pay a bribe. To get licenses from the government, they must pay bribes. And also taking bribes from investors, from people who want to do business here. Ugandans and non-Ugandans that want to do business in Uganda do not pay bribes. Do not pay bribes. It's not necessary. Instead, expose them. Report the scam, report the parasites to the State House Anti-Corruption team of Brigadier Isoke and Colonel Nakarema's group. Action will be taken. Because this corruption is another now big problem in disturbing the implementation of government projects, but also in disturbing the private sector. Private sector should not be interrupted by these corrupt people. The 8th crucial ingredient is protecting our environment, which means the wetlands, the forests, the rivers, the lakes, and the water towers in the form of our high mountains of the Rwenzori, the Elgon, the Kigezi Mountains, the Agoro Hills, and the hills of Singo, Kochi, Buweju, Bunyaruguru, Rwampara, Rahama, etc. Why do we need to protect these environmental assets? It is because they provide us with 3 of the most primary lifesavers. These are air, water, and food. You cannot live without air for 3 minutes. If you don't breathe 3 minutes, you are dead. 3 minutes. You cannot live without water for 3 days. And you cannot live without food for 8 days. These environmental assets are responsible for our plentiful rainfall and water. As long as our rainfall is maintained and our water supply is maintained, we shall always be sure of food, including food supported by irrigation. We shall always be sure of water for drinking and other forms of human personal use, e.g. bathing, etc. Factories need water. Those in the wetlands must therefore leave the wetlands peacefully, persuaded by this unimpeachable logic of our survival. Sirina kujja kulwana nammwe abali mu ntobazi. Amazima gano okutegeera obukulu bw'ensonga eno okuli wano mu kiwandiiko kwe kubalaga nti muve mu ntobazi. Leave the wetlands because of the logic here. Because those environmental bodies, the forests, the lakes, the wetlands, the mountains, here they are responsible for three things: for air, water, and food. Meaning, in other words, for survival. In other areas, we are talking of gaga, wealth, and so on, but here it is survival. That's what we are talking about. Those in the wetlands must leave them peacefully, persuaded by this unimpeachable logic of our survival. The ones in the Buked of Busoga and Kije's areas will be assisted to shift from the wetland rice growing to either growing that rice by irrigation on the non-wetland land of Butaka Bukalu, or to fish farming at the edges of the wetlands, allowing the rest of the wetlands to regenerate. Those who have encroached on wetlands in other areas must leave unconditionally because they went there knowing it was a mistake. The ones of Busoga, Bukede, and Chiyez were misled by the governments of that time, such as Chibimba rice scheme. That's why we shall assist them to get out. But the other ones, in the other areas, they must go unconditionally. They must leave. And I'm going to write an executive order. It will be detailed. Anybody who does not implement it will be answerable. The local chiefs, because those wetlands which are being encroached on, they belong to a parish. What is the parish chief doing? They are not on the moon. A wetland which is being encroached on is in a parish. A parish has got a parish chief. Oyo ngenda kumukwata oyo. I will arrest that one. That wetland is in a sub-county. What is the sub-county chief doing? How about Giso? There's a Giso there. What are they doing? There is a cow in the district. There's another DC. So please, I'm going to issue a detailed executive order. People must leave the wetlands, must leave the forest and the river banks. 200 meters from the lake shore must be allowed to regenerate into forest or waterline shrubbery, which we, the indigenous people of this area, know well. We know the bushes which grow near the water. Emenava, Embobo, Eminyeganyeje, etc. See, if you leave, these bushes will grow. If you see on the way to Entebbe, that Ikituburu, I think they call it Ikituburu, near the water now there is swamp grass there. On the left as you go to Entebbe. You can see swamp grass, Ebigugu, Cyperus latifolia, You can see it clear on the left. So if you leave the place, the swamp bush and grass will grow. 100 meters from the river banks must be similarly vacated. It is only the factories that are already built in what used to be wetlands that will be kept. Because the factories are very expensive and we need them. But no new ones, no new factories must be built or licensed to be built in wetlands. Even those that were erroneously licensed by UIA, but where the construction had not yet started, should be allocated alternative land. The environmental authorities may permit well-organized residential houses and hotels near the lake shore or the river banks which observe environmental rules, e.g. planting grass and trees so that there are no bare patches of soil from which the umkoka, the mtunga, the runoff water, would pick soil to silt the water bodies. There should be no cultivation or slums near the water bodies. However, residential houses built in the wetlands must be demolished. Water is not only important for air, life support and food generation, but also enables us to generate electricity, hydroelectricity. As far as the rivers are concerned, Uganda is both a downstream and an upstream country. These words mean downstream means where the rivers are going. Upstream is where the rivers are coming from. So Uganda is both. It is both an upstream. There are rivers which start here, but also it is downstream because there are rivers which come here from other African countries. According to our water people, 14 billion cubic meters of water per year that Uganda gets come from rivers, comes from rivers that originate from Uganda, while 29 billion cubic meters of water comes from rivers that we share with other sister countries. Given the political fragmentation that we try to heal by regional integration, we cannot always guarantee the proper management of the rivers and their catchment areas that spring from the brother countries vis-à-vis soil erosion, silting, etc. However, we should set the good example by correctly managing the water bodies within our jurisdiction. We will then have the moral authority to approach the brother African countries about the shared rivers. I therefore demand that all these encroaching on the wetlands in the manner mentioned above vacate those sites as laid out above. The rivers like Ruizi, Mpanga, Mayanja, Kafu, Aswa, Agago, Mporogoma, Mobuku, and their tributary wetlands must be fully protected from those uninformed encroachers. This will ensure that all our 14 billion cubic meters of internal waters is safe, and then we can additionally interact with the brother countries about the 29 billion cubic meters of water from them. Remember that we are mandated by common sense and by the international law that we must share the water generated in Uganda and what we get from the brother upstream countries with the downstream brother countries, which are South Sudan, Sudan, Khartoum, and Egypt. Of course, water should not be a problem for Africa because the River Congo alone produces 3,000 billion cubic meters of water per annum. Our wonderful Nile at Khartoum only has 85 billion cubic meters per annum. It is this much smaller quantity of water that some of the actors in the Nile Valley spend so much time quarreling over. Yet the Congo River is equal to 35 Nile rivers in terms of water. If only Congo was stable and Afro-oriented, I imagine that Africa would not be talking about lack of water. Every second, this huge amount of water of the River Congo is feeding the Atlantic Ocean. Who told you that the Atlantic Ocean is thirsty for water? It is Africa that is thirsty for a vision. With these eight successes guaranteed. Because you remember that's how we started. Bale kanga biwa sande kukola, biwakola bita sande kukola, namu matagari mugo. They left undone what they ought to have done, and they did other things. We are now telling you these are the things to do, the 8. With these 8, success is guaranteed. It is these that we should work on and ignore the noise of those that live undone what they ought to have done and do that they ought not to have done, and there is no truth in them. Ugandans should not waste time worrying about aid, about loans, etc. We do not need most of these loans. We happily work with all the countries in the world that respect our sovereignty. That is how the UN system should operate. No country should interfere in the internal affairs of another country. That is why we separate foreign affairs from internal affairs. Why should anybody catapult his values through foreign affairs into the internal affairs of another country? Human needs are similar: food, shelter, clothing, mobility, poverty, etc. However, their management evolves differently and at different speeds in the different countries. It is wrong to try to export systems and values, or to export revolution, new ideas, or export counter-revolution, old ideas. This was the mistake of the Pope when Protestantism rose up. You remember when there was a split in the church, some of the church tried to use violence to suppress the other people, which led to wars. I think they were called the 30 Years' Wars, the religious wars. It was a waste of time. It was the mistake of Metternich when capitalism came on the scene. This Metternich was a prime minister of Austria-Hungary. And when the capitalists took over power in France, he tried to overthrow them. And he caused so much problem for Europe. And I think that's how Austria-Hungary broke up. Mistake of Napoleon when he tried to export the ideas of the French Revolution. The mistake of the Western intervention powers against Bolshevik communism in Russia. The mistake of the imperialist countries trying to maintain neo-colonialism in Africa, like the killing of Patrice Lumumba or the killing of Salvador Allende in Chile. If you think that your ideas are correct, read the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 16. It says, "Let your light shine shine before men, that they see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." That's what it says. If you know you are right, don't try to use force and pressure to change people. Just show your good example and we copy it. In other words, influence people by your good examples and not by coercion. Those actors who try to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries overestimate themselves and underestimate the capacity of the people of the world and their ability to defend their legitimate interests. Those actors are also uninformed. The imperialist actors used the gap in history following when the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, while the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America were not mobilized. They took that advantage to control much of the world. However, two phenomena outside the control of the imperialists marked the beginning of the counter-offensive by the colonized peoples of the world. One phenomenon was the coming to power in Russia of the communists in 1917. This was a social force in a semi-modern big country that had no interest in colonizing other people of the world. Marshal of the Soviet Union Gorgy Zhukov, in his book Reminiscences and Reflections on page 267, writes as follows. This is in quotes. Let me recall a set of facts which, when reported to Stalin, were likely to heighten his distrust for the above warning. I mean the security negotiations with Nazi Germany in London in 1939, precisely when Britain, France, and USSR were holding military talks in Moscow. British diplomats were offering the Nazis an agreement on dividing the spheres of influence on a world scale. The British Minister of Trade, Hudson, said during his talks with a Nazi called something, Wartat, a Nazi Privy Councillor, close to Field Marshal Goering, that three extensive regions offering unlimited opportunities of economic activity, the British Empire, China, and Russia, were open to the two countries. These people are proposing to share the world, proposing to the Russians, but the Russians rejected it. Why do you want to share the world? Why do you want to share other people? You can't be clever when you think like that. Eh? You can share cows, you can share goats, but to share people. Why do you want to share? Spheres of influence. Who are you? When Hitler tried to offer the Soviet Union to discuss the idea of dividing the world in spheres of influence, he encountered a sharp and unequivocal refusal of the Soviet side, which would not even hear of the subject. The imperialist actors did not pay heed to this just stand, and inter-imperialist rivalry soon plunged the globe into the catastrophe of the Second World War, where the Soviet Union played the major role of defeating fascist Germany and Japan. The anti-imperialist camp grew when the communists took control of another big country, China, in 1949. In fact, one clever American general, Omar Bradley, aptly described the involvement of the Western countries in the Korean War as, in quotes, a wrong war at a wrong time, in a wrong place, with the wrong enemy. So, those who want to control the world, this was their first problem. These big countries which were taken over by people who didn't believe, who didn't share their view. The second phenomenon was the founding of the ANC, the African National Congress, by the broad sections of the African peoples in South Africa to spearhead the resistance of the African people against the evil system of colonialism. The African resistance would no longer be led by chiefs with ostrich feathers, but by more enlightened freedom fighters such as Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Samora Moses Machel, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Robert Mugabe, and others. So these two events, the communists taking over Russia in 1917, and then China in 1949, and taking a strong stand against Ofuzu Matwadi, against imperialism, and then the ANC being started, led by new people, and later joined by other movements, like the TANU of Tanganyika, like our UNC here, like the parties of Ghana. These two events could no longer allow the imperialists to play around. With these two factors, it is futile for the imperialist countries to entertain illusions of perpetuating their control over Africa, let alone the whole of the global South. They are squandering abundant goodwill that the Africans have toward the citizens of those countries in spite of the past mistakes. Since the founding of the ANC in 1912, much of the global South has ejected the imperialists. Indonesia under Sukarno in 1946. India under Gandhi and Nehru in 1947. Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, 1954. Cuba under Castro, 1959, and so on and so forth. Yet these victorious anti-colonial revolutions are not necessarily anti-West in all aspects. Take Vietnam. Who lost when the victorious Vietnam united and became a stronger powerhouse in Southeast Asia? Even the USA today seems to have good relations with the strong Vietnam. Therefore, these standoffs and conflicts are due to philosophical, ideological, and strategic shallowness or parasitism by some narrow groups in the respective countries or both. Those involved should stop wasting our time and the good opportunities of the whole world.